talk to you about unconscious bias against poverty in schools.
All right.
Okay. How many of you have ever seen students in your classroom and made snap judgments about how those kids are going to be through the year?
Yeah. Don't like to admit it, but yeah.
Yeah. And have you ever made judgments on your students based on what other teachers have said to you
Oh,
about
yeah.
those students?
100%.
Yeah,
Sure.
once or twice.
So, most of the time, we consciously try to go against any bias. As a teacher, we try to look at all students the same way. But unfortunately, studies show that there is an unconscious bias that sneaks into our brain when it comes to looking at other people. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just a human thing in the way that we are as human beings. So, the best way to combat this unconscious bias is to understand it, to discover if you have it, and then understand how to address it, the best ways to address it. Pause. What just happened?
Rolling.
So, on the agenda for today, we're going to talk about what unconscious bias is, why does it matter in our school, to our students and to us as teachers, what does the research show us about unconscious bias and how it impacts children, and we're going to have some interactive reflection moments with each other, and then we're going to talk about strategies for how to address it and actions we can take as teachers and administrators in our school. So I want you to think for a minute about your students and assumptions that you make about their homes, their home life, the way that they engage with other students and with other teachers in the school. I want you to consider a time when maybe you made a judgment about a student and where they came from. I know for myself, I have done this. I grew up in poverty, so I make assumptions about students in poverty, and I know what it feels like to have that bias against you. So I understand how these students might feel. On your table, I've placed some Post-it notes. I'd like you to just jot down a couple of times that you can think of when this might have happened in your classroom, or that you might have observed it on the part of somebody else, or that you might have seen students treating each other with a bias, consciously or unconsciously. Just take a minute, we'll pause, and some notes down and chat with each other a little bit.
We're good.
Okay, so hopefully you had some time to discuss what experience you've had and what kind of commonalities you share as teachers in your classroom. And would anyone like to share experiences you've had? Yeah.
So, as a teacher, I've had some students come in where maybe they're really quiet in their home, in the classroom. And then once you start to get to talk to them, you realize things aren't going well at home. And that can kind of make you lean one way or another towards them. So
Right.
I've noticed that.
That's good. And how have any of you noticed how students might perceive their teachers or their classroom experience if they're in that kind of a situation?
I think it depends on the person, like their personality. Some view it as an escape, like, hey, I'm at school, I'm just being a regular kid, And some see it as stressful because they're trying to keep up the appearance of, with fashion or trends or having the newest phone or something like that,
Yeah.
and trying to keep up appearances. So it can either be really stressful or it can be an escape, I've found.
Yeah, that's a great point, because our district is not exactly known for having an element of poverty here. We actually don't have a ton of poverty in our district. However, there is some poverty. We have about maybe 20% who live in high levels of poverty. And so for those students, I think it's especially difficult in a district where there's not as much poverty, because they're more singled out because it's not as prevalent in the school, if that makes any sense to you. So I think you're right. Trying to keep up with the fashion, keep up with the latest technology, the shoes, all of it, and even school supplies. So this little chart shows you the differences in cognitive skills where children begin in kindergarten based on their socioeconomic status. And you can see that if they're high socioeconomic status, they're starting right on the start line, ready to go. But the lower in economic status the children get, the farther behind they are on the start line for education. And I think that that says a lot. And there could be a multitude of reasons for that. It could be because they don't have their parents don't have the access to a preschool, or the parents are working a lot more and they don't have time to dedicate to reading and studying with the children. So there's all kinds of reasons for it that aren't the fault of the student. So unconscious or implicit bias happens when we don't realize the bias that we're actually exhibiting. I'm going to show you this little video quick from the Kilwane Institute so you can understand a little bit how it works in your brain. So would anyone like to share what they just maybe thought about that video that I just showed you? Yeah, Alex.
Yeah, so when I saw it, I've heard the term before, but I've never seen it really defined in such a way, like the attitudes and stereotypes that are just there in our heads just from interacting in the world around us. And I think that helped me realize that it is a subconscious behavior that we're not fully aware of. And I think understanding that definition helps us understand our own biases.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, the book Blind Spots they call them mind bugs. They're like hidden in your mind, and they feed you this assumption that's already there without you even realizing it. So I don't know if you think about a time when you've been walking in a strange city or riding a subway or even getting into an Uber and you make an assumption about the person next to you or with you or driving your car. without even asking any questions about it. That's an implicit bias that you have, positive or negative, right? This showed you that it can also be a positive thing. You have a preference for or against an individual group that's rooted in your prejudice. So that's something to keep in mind. So we also want to keep this idea of equality and equity and what that means in education. So we often think that we should have equality for everybody, and everybody should be afforded the same exact opportunities and the same resources. And everything should be the same for every student. And that seems like that would be what's fair. But is it fair and is it equitable? And which one should be more important, the way that we instruct our students? So a lot of times people from economically disadvantaged backgrounds have barriers, including less resources accessible to them, less home support, and increased stressors. They might have to go home and take care of their whole household while their parents are working. And that's something that maybe some of their friends or other people don't have to do, and we need to keep that in mind as educators. So when it comes to equality and equity, we have to decide, how do we bring fairness to all of our students? So do we as educators hold lower expectations for students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds? Do you look at somebody and think maybe they're not as motivated, or maybe they don't have the ability or the support to be able to excel in some of these higher level classes? And research with implicit associations show you that teachers often think these students are going to be lazy or unmotivated, but in reality it's just that they don't have the same kind of access to supports that other students might have. So I like this slide because it shows you the difference between equality and equity. If we give everybody the exact same things, that doesn't necessarily make them have equal opportunities. As you can see that they're starting off with so much less. So doesn't it make sense to give the ones who are starting out with less a little bit more to help them be able to achieve equally as the people who are starting out with more? I'm not sure if I said that quite right, but which is more important in education, equality or equity, and how do you find that balance? Do some students need more assistance or more resources than others, and how do you get that to them without making them feel like they're being targeted? And this is just another different way to look at it. When we talk about equity, we're looking at a very generic term focused on the whole class, the whole group, and then equality. But equity is different. It adapts to each unique individual and attempts to be more fair. I know we just had our grades due, and I just did all my grades for all my students, and I would be lying if I said I did not grade some students differently based on their effort or where they came from. So I think that some students maybe need a little bit more boost to get them where they need to be, and to help them. Hopefully that's not a bad thing, but I don't know. This is just a little chart that shows you how the pathway of inequity or the lower socioeconomic status of some students fits in. So they come in living in a low-income household. They might not have the same supplies. They might not have an up-to-date computer. They might not have the same kind of clothing. And in fact, they might not even be able to participate in a lot of the extracurriculars at school because maybe they don't have a ride. Maybe they don't have the money to pay for the sporting equipment. Maybe they don't have the support at home. Any of those reasons. So they're starting out already in a lower standard, I guess. And the teachers then, this moves into the educator assumption. Is the student lazy, unmotivated, or just uninterested? They don't care. They might be sitting there bored or looking like they're bored when really they've got everything on their mind about home or what they're going to do when they get home and the things they have to take care of when they get home. And then this leads to lower academic performance, which provides less academic support through the classroom. So maybe the teacher doesn't want to call on that student because they don't feel like they're being attentive or interested in the class itself. So how does it look in a classroom? Generally we categorize. It's our human nature to categorize everything we see, isn't it? Animals, people, cars. We place everything in categories. And we make our automatic associations, linking poverty with negative attributes. Decision and interpretations, we make our assumptions through the biases that we have about the way a student looks, or the way they act, or the way they talk, or even the way they walk down the hall, or who they're walking down the hall with even. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The way that we interact with our students is almost the way that they're going to behave as an outcome because of the way we've treated them. You know, it's a big circle. So ask yourself, am I biased? Below is a link. You can scan that QR code, or you can copy that link into your browser, and you can take for yourself an implicit bias test. It takes you right to that Harvard site, their implicit association test. And I'd like you to just pause for a minute and take about 5 minutes to go through that test and just kind of make some observations about what you can find with your own implicit bias. And no one's going to look at it but you, but I want you to just kind of see what you can find out for yourself and maybe gain an understanding of how you feel, or if anything surprises you, okay? We'll pause that for a second. Okay, so did anybody find anything in your implicit bias test that surprised you? You don't have to say it out loud, just raise your hands if you found something surprising. Awesome, that's great. That's what that's for. And I know that this test doesn't necessarily take you directly to a bias against poverty, but just acknowledging that you can have an implicit bias, or a bias that you don't even realize is there, I think that that is enough to be able to say, okay, maybe I should kind of check myself and find out if I have some biases against somebody. Okay, so specific impacts of bias on our students. First of all, lower expectations for students who appear under-resourced. It might just be that we're trying to be kind, and we're just trying to say, don't worry, you don't have to do this part, or don't worry if you can't fulfill this obligation or whatever, but that's not really helping that student. Far better to give them the resources they need to help them to meet that requirement. Interpreting missing homework as a lack of effort rather than a lack of resources. You don't know what your student is going home to, and if they're coming back continually missing homework or missing papers, or not having their book, or not having their computer charged, all I can say to that is there are some students who are walking home who would prefer to stay at school. There are some students who are going home and would rather not be going home. And you don't know what they're walking into, so keep that in mind if you've got a student who's continually missing homework. It doesn't always mean that they're just not trying. There's usually something else going on. Fewer invitations, advanced opportunities because of assumptions, so they might not get asked to try out for sports because maybe the coaches realize they're not going to be able to get there, but maybe that's what they need. Or they might not get asked to try out for the drama play for the same reason. Who knows if they have access to what they need to be able to participate. But that might be just what that student needs. So find out, get to know your students. Stereotyping their family life or home situation. This happens a lot based on the clothing kids wear, the people they hang out with. Maybe they come to school with mud on their boots or anything like that, and you're making a stereotype about their abilities because of what they look like, and that's not fair for anybody. And then the discipline disparities. So a lot of times, those kids who are the ones that seem uninterested, don't have their homework done, they end up in the ice room because they're not prepared, or in the ice room because they're disruptive, or in the ice room because they're not participating at all, or whatever reason. They usually have a higher discipline record than their counterparts. And then this figure just shows you that only 5% of college graduates are poor, while 28% of the poor have do not even have a high school diploma. So I thought this was really interesting, this graph. It says bachelor's degree or higher, and then percent in poverty by age 25 plus with their level of education. I think that's super interesting. So I think you should kind of digest that chart for a minute. Kind of a compounding problem. And if you, going back to that slide we saw before, when they're starting out so far behind, it makes sense that they're gonna not be as excelled later in their educational career. So I want you to take a minute to think, pair, share. A 9th grade student from a low-income household misses 2 homework assignments and is late to class twice this week. How might an educator interpret this? 9th grader, he's been late, he's missing assignments. I just want you to take a minute and talk amongst your table. What assumptions might come into play and what might be some alternate explanations? So we'll pause for a second. Okay, great. So we're going to keep on going. The impact on students, what happens, we talked about this already, a reduced access to accelerated classes. You know, in our school, because we are a well-off school, students have to pay to take AP classes. They have to actually pay $90 to take their AP exams. And we always tell them it's worth it because it's cheaper than college, right? But there are definitely students who cannot afford to pay for that exam. So we preclude them from taking those higher level classes just because they can't afford to pay for that exam, and that's not fair. And then lower student-teacher relationship trust and increasing disengagement and chance of dropout. And usually it's not the kids who are the top of the socioeconomic ladder who drop out of school, right? So something to keep in mind. So what can we do? First, self-reflection. Examine your assumptions about students' backgrounds. Take a look at the kids. Take a look at who you're paying more attention to or less attention to. Take a look at who you're calling on more often, and notice these things. Like, observe this about yourself. And then use the quiz tool to find out, do you have a bias, right? Implicit bias. And build awareness for yourself. You could keep a reflexive journal, even though I know that nobody really has time for that, but you could still maybe jot down some notes next to your desk for yourself to remind you what kind of assumptions are you making, and then what is supporting that or not supporting it. And then talk with your colleagues, talk with each other, right? Discuss these things. Awareness is the first step, and that must be followed with intentional action. Strategies up here for addressing socioeconomic disparities. Education is the key to breaking any cycle. Early childhood interventions. Bridging the digital divide is important, and so on. You can read these for yourselves. I'm not going to linger here and read them to you, but I think these are a good toolbox for changing things and bridging the divide here. So consider what takes place in your own classroom. Build trusting relationships, learn about students, context, and show genuine interest. Believe it or not, students care. They understand if you're pretending or not pretending. They know if you care about them or if you're just pretending to care about them. So get to know them and understand. Design assignments with flexibility. Recognize access issues, internet devices, quiet workspaces, and so on. Use data mindfully. Disaggregate by SES and monitor for disparities. And then expect growth and communicate high expectations for all students. Just because my grades might be adapted a little bit, that doesn't change the expectation level, right? So my expectations are here, and some kids need more help than others to get here, but they're all gonna get here, okay? And then reflect on the language. Don't use the words poor kids or kids don't have much. Instead, use students facing economic hardship or students with limited resources. And now I'm gonna run out. So I'm gonna pause for just 1 second. Oh, shoot. All right, as a district, what can we do on a bigger picture level? Review our policies, discipline, tracking, etc. We can create systems of support, mentoring, tutoring, and we can promote an inclusive culture with signs visible out in the hallways. and engage families and communities, recognize home context, resource limitations, and strengths. So, share some strategies and plans that you can implement this week with your table. We'll pause for a minute while you do. Everybody did? Okay. Okay, and so finally, I just want to make it clear, our classrooms matter. Making time means prioritizing equity. Treating all students exactly the same does not bring equity, right? It might bring equality, but we have to understand different starting points and contexts. And yes, we work in the system, but we as educators still have agency in how we respond to that system. Okay, and then these are some questions for discussion that I can open up to. What are some barriers preventing equity? How does addressing equity benefit all students, and why is it important to question our biases? And those are my sources, and that's it. So thank you very much for joining me today. I enjoy it. Thank